"We're implementing cutting-edge operational upgrades," she declared to the entire staff, her gaze avoiding mine entirely. Certain roles are unfortunately becoming superfluous. My name is William Lancaster. For nearly 19 years, I managed the automated systems at Gildan Industries, right here in Kalamazoo, Michigan. 19 years of fine-tuning equipment, crafting system software, and designing systems that were beyond the comprehension of others. 19 years spent making other individuals appear competent. "The adjustment will be effective immediately," Janet persisted, her voice reverberating across our morning assembly. The factory floor resonated behind us, a sound that was more familiar to me than my own pulse. "We've partnered with Statera Technologies to handle our future systems administration." I remained rooted to the spot, arms folded, as 37 faces turned in my direction. Not with empathy, but with mere interest, curious to see how the old-timer would handle the situation. I gave a solitary nod and returned to my workstation, commencing the process of unplugging my laptop, emptying my drawer of the coffee cup my son crafted in the 5th grade, the extra pair of spectacles, the notepad filled with handwritten algorithm snippets. Since my arrival, the factory had changed management a total of 5 times. This marked the first instance where they had determined I was dispensable. There was no shouting or arguing. I'd observed this unfold for others over the years. Men who resisted but ultimately departed, albeit with diminished dignity. I wouldn't afford Janet that gratification. As I was placing the final items into a cardboard container, she approached. "The terms of your severance are rather generous," she remarked, sliding a document across my desk. 3 months, in addition to your accumulated vacation days." "Generous," I echoed. The folder remained undisturbed where she had positioned it. "William, please understand. Your systems are, well, they're antiquated. Statera is executing a comprehensive digital overhaul, cloud-based surveillance, artificial intelligence algorithms. That's the direction in which manufacturing is headed." I fastened my laptop bag. "They'll reverse engineer the calibration files to glean whatever insights they require." She glanced at her wristwatch. "Human resources requires your presence before you depart." I nodded and hoisted my container. Janet had held the position of plant supervisor for almost a year, possessing an MBA from some highly regarded institution. She spoke of efficiency metrics and optimization strategies as though they were mystical incantations. She never once inquired how our exclusive systems actually operated, nor did she ever question why our factory boasted the lowest rate of defects in the sector, despite utilizing equipment that was more than a dozen years old. I walked past the CNC machinery I had programmed, the conveyor mechanism I had fine-tuned, the quality control scanners featuring my personalized algorithms. Janet was accurate about one aspect. I had constructed systems that were outdated, but I had engineered them to endure, and I had done so in a manner that ensured I was the only one capable of rectifying them when they failed. I began my tenure at Gildan during a period when we manufactured automotive components exclusively for 4 car manufacturers. We now provide precision components to 15 automotive companies and have expanded into the aeronautical industry. The previous proprietor, Harold Gildan himself, recruited me directly from college after I demonstrated how I could reprogram their initial robotic arm to operate nearly 35% faster without compromising accuracy. "Son, you understand their language," he had declared, gesturing towards the machines. "That's a rarity." For approximately 11 years, Harold permitted me to develop our automated systems according to my own methods. I crafted proprietary firmware for each significant piece of equipment, devising calibration protocols that maximized performance from machines that had far exceeded their prime. When manufacturers discontinued support for older models, I ensured they remained operational. Upon the arrival of new equipment, I modified their software to seamlessly integrate with our existing systems. Following Harold's retirement, his daughter sold the enterprise to Trellis Logistics, a logistics conglomerate expanding into manufacturing. They retained my services because the data supported it. Why replace $60 million worth of equipment when my algorithms enabled them to perform comparably to newer models? Then Janet arrived, youthful, ambitious, armed with PowerPoint presentations illustrating how outdated our factory was in comparison to competitors. She never addressed me directly during meetings, preferring to discuss legacy systems as though they were ailments in need of eradication. Almost 4 months ago, I observed Statera Technologies representatives touring the factory floor, capturing images of control panels and posing inquiries to operators. I subsequently approached Janet. "Are we engaging consultants?" I inquired. "Merely exploring some avenues for optimization," she responded, tapping away at her tablet. "Nothing to be concerned about." The following week, I was locked out of the management server. My access credentials suddenly lapsed. I was issued an apology for the malfunction, but only partial permissions were restored. I could still perform my duties, but certain administrative functions now necessitated Janet's authorization. I mentioned this to Craig, our floor supervisor, and the individual I considered my closest friend at work. We occasionally went fishing together on weekends. "Politics," he muttered. "The new manager needs to assert herself. Just keep your head down." That evening, I backed up all my calibration files and code repositories onto my personal computer. Not company property, but my intellectual output. The systems would function adequately without them, until they inevitably did not. Until a machine deviated from tolerance or a sensor required recalibration. The solutions were stored exclusively within my memory and private notes, documented nowhere else. They were about to discover the true value of nearly 19 years of institutional expertise. My severance meeting with Human Resources lasted approximately 23 minutes. Signatures, explanations of benefits, the return of my building access card. The HR manager, James, averted eye contact throughout. He had been with the company for almost as long as I had. "Is there anything else you require from me before I depart?" I inquired once we had concluded. James appeared uneasy. "Actually, Janet mentioned you might consider a consulting agreement. 3 weeks to aid with the transition, compensated at your current rate." I nearly chuckled. 3 weeks to assimilate nearly 19 years of knowledge. "It would provide you with some supplemental income while you search for employment," he proposed weakly. "I'll decline." I stood up. "But I appreciate the offer." As I made my way through the factory floor, I passed Craig. He disengaged from a conversation and followed me towards the exit. "This is utter nonsense, William," he remarked quietly. I informed Janet, "You're the only individual who comprehends how these systems operate in unison." Apparently, Statera Technologies disagrees. They're salespersons. They're unaware of their own ignorance. Craig glanced over his shoulder. What transpires when the next calibration cycle arrives, or when the Southwest conveyor begins emitting that grinding noise it makes every winter? I shrugged. No longer my concern. "Come on, man. Almost 19 years, and you're merely walking away." I halted at the door and turned towards Craig. "What precisely do you anticipate me doing?" "Begging for my position. Informing Janet that she's committing an error. Do you believe that would alter anything?" Craig had no response. I patted him on the shoulder. "I'll give you a call. Perhaps we can arrange that fishing excursion next weekend." But I wouldn't call. And deep down, I suspect Craig was aware of it. I drove home in complete silence. No radio, no phone calls, only the hum of tires on asphalt. My house felt desolate, despite being filled with nearly 19 years of possessions. My son was away at college. My wife and I had divorced almost 4 years prior. I settled into my home office chair and activated my laptop. A notification appeared. Gildan Industries VPN disconnected. That was when it truly registered. Nearly 19 years erased in a single workday. All the late nights resolving production emergencies. All the weekends dedicated to upgrading systems while the lines were down. The understanding of every peculiarity and flaw in our equipment. The pride I took in our defect rates. Consistently the lowest among our competitors. All disposable, according to Janet. I accessed my personal drive and examined the backup files I had created. Calibration parameters, custom firmware, troubleshooting manuals I had authored but never distributed. I had no intention of utilizing them against the company. However, I also had no intention of relinquishing them. They had made their decision. They would have to endure the consequences. I closed the laptop, proceeded to the kitchen, and opened a beer. For the first time in almost 19 years, I didn't have to fret about being on call for a factory emergency. I should have felt relieved. Instead, a cold conviction settled within my chest. They would call, eventually, and when they did, I would determine the true value of nearly 19 years of dedication. Almost 4 weeks elapsed. I submitted resumes, received calls from recruiters, spent afternoons fishing. The severance checks arrived punctually. I updated my LinkedIn profile and received expressions of sympathy from former colleagues at other firms. No one from Gildan reached out, not even Craig, until my phone rang on a Friday morning, almost 7 weeks after my departure. "William? This is Janet Barnes from Gildan Industries." I allowed the silence to linger a beat too long. "Hello, Janet. I hope you're doing well." Her voice had shed some of its self-assurance. "Listen, we're encountering some problems with the southwestern conveyor line, and our team is struggling to diagnose the issue. I was wondering if you might be available for a brief consultation." "What sort of problems?" "Random stoppages. Error codes that don't correspond to any documentation. Production on that line is down approximately 24%. I closed my eyes. The southwestern conveyor, the one I had cautioned maintenance about almost 4 months before my dismissal, the one that required its controller firmware updated prior to winter. "I see. And what does Statera Technologies have to say about it?" A pause. "They're still becoming familiar with some of our legacy systems. I'm confident they'll resolve it." I maintained a neutral tone. After all, they're executing a comprehensive digital transformation. Janet cleared her throat. "William, I appreciate that you may feel underappreciated, but this is impacting the entire team. Individuals could forfeit shifts if we're unable to rectify this." She was skilled, appealing to my allegiance to the floor workers. But I recalled how none of them had spoken out when I was escorted out. "I am available for consulting," I stated finally. "My rate is $350 per hour, 5-hour minimum, payable in advance, and I require a signed contract specifying the scope of work." That's more than twice your previous salary rate. "That's my consulting rate. Accept it or decline it." Silence ensued. "I'll need to seek approval. May I call you back?" "Certainly." She called back within the hour. They consented to my terms. The following morning, I drove to the factory, registered as a visitor, and was escorted to the production floor. The southwestern conveyor sat idle, encircled by Statera technicians and exasperated operators. Craig spotted me and flashed a relieved smile. "Thank goodness you're here." It took me precisely 31 minutes to diagnose the problem. A firmware issue, precisely as I had suspected. The solution necessitated accessing the calibration files I had developed years ago. "I'll need my laptop connected to the control system," I informed Janet, who had been lingering nearby. "Of course, whatever you require." I connected my laptop and made a performance of searching through folders, knowing precisely where the files were situated. As I worked, I overheard 2 Statera technicians whispering, "Should have been documented somewhere." Complete chaos, these legacy systems. I stifled a grin. 51 minutes later, the conveyor hummed back to life. Operators returned to their stations. Janet appeared simultaneously relieved and uneasy. "Thank you, William. I'm uncertain what we would have done. Glad to assist." I closed my laptop. "Will there be anything else?" "Actually," she hesitated. "We're experiencing similar issues with the CNC machines in Bay 5. Random quality control failures. Tolerance is fluctuating. Could you examine them while you're here?" I glanced at my watch. That would exceed our agreed scope of work. I'd require another contract. Her expression tightened. William, be reasonable. You're already here. I am being reasonable. I'm treating this as the business arrangement you established when you eliminated my physician. I packed up my laptop. Email me if you wish to arrange another consultation. As I walked away, Craig fell into step beside me. It's not just the CNC machines, he remarked quietly. Everything's starting to malfunction. Quality control is detecting defects on a daily basis. Returns from customers are up almost 40%. I nodded, but remained silent. They're in way over their heads, aren't they? Craig inquired. Appears that way. Craig glanced around and lowered his voice. You foresaw this, didn't you? I met his gaze. I didn't need to foresee it, Craig. I constructed these systems. I know precisely what transpires when they're not maintained adequately. And you're going to make them compensate for it. It wasn't a question, but I answered nonetheless. They already are. The calls became routine thereafter. Every week, occasionally twice, Janet would reach out with another emergency. Each time, I negotiated a new contract. Each time, my rate increased slightly. Each time, I rectified exclusively the specific issue they engaged me to address. Almost 3 months after my departure, I received a different call. Mr. Lancaster, this is Neil Davison, Vice President of Operations at Trellis Logistics. I sat up straighter in my chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Davison. I'll proceed directly to the point. Our Kalamazoo facility is experiencing unparalleled quality control problems. Warranty claims have almost quintupled. We've forfeited 3 aeronautical contracts due to precision concerns. Janet Barnes has informed me that you've been providing consulting services for specific technical issues. That's accurate. I'd like to discuss a more encompassing arrangement. I remained silent, anticipating. We'd like to bring you back as a contractor, 8 months, full-time, to resolve our current problems and properly document your knowledge of our systems. I see. I leaned back in my chair, and what transpired with Statera Technologies. A pause. We're reevaluating that relationship. Translation. They were being shown the door. I permitted myself a brief moment of satisfaction before responding. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Davison, but I'm currently in discussions with several other firms. My availability is limited. State your price, he said bluntly. I quoted a figure that was almost 4 times my previous salary. Davison didn't even hesitate. Agreed. I'll have contracts drawn up today. 2 days later, I walked back into Gildan Industries as a contractor. Janet was nowhere to be found. Craig informed me she'd been reassigned to another trellis facility. As I reconnected my laptop to the main control systems, I discovered the extent of the damage. Statera's attempts to reverse engineer my calibration procedures had corrupted Davison's firmware. Their artificial intelligence algorithms had drifted tolerances so far out of spec that nearly 40% of parts were failing final quality checks. But the most telling discovery occurred when I accessed the management server. There, in a folder labeled Strategic Plans, I found Janet's original proposal to Trellis executives. It detailed how replacing me with Statera Technologies would save the company over $300,000 annually. It projected a temporary 5% increase in defect rates during transition, deemed acceptable for the cost savings. Janet hadn't merely eliminated my position to Modernize. She'd sacrificed quality for cost-cutting, gambling that the systems I'd built were simple enough for anyone to maintain. She'd never bothered to comprehend what I actually did. I called Craig into my office and displayed the document to him. He whistled softly. She was targeting you from day one. Not just me, I replied. Quality. Precision. Everything this factory built its reputation on. So, what's your plan? Rectify everything and depart once more. I regarded him. No, I'm going to rectify their systems. Then I'm going to ensure this never transpires again. How? I smiled faintly. By rendering myself irreplaceable in an entirely new manner. That evening, I commenced designing a new factory management system, one that integrated all our existing equipment, but with proper documentation, proper fail-safes, proper transparency. One that would demonstrate to executives precisely what they were obtaining for their investment, and one that would necessitate my ongoing consultation to maintain at my new contractor rates. They'd attempted to replace me with algorithms. Now I would illustrate to them the true value of almost 19 years of human expertise. Over the ensuing month, I methodically repaired every system in the factory. I initiated with the most critical production lines, the aerospace components, the high-precision automotive parts. I restored original calibration settings for my personal backups, updated firmware, and executed full diagnostics on every piece of equipment. Defect rates declined immediately. Production speeds increased. The factory floor began to resonate with its former efficiency. But I didn't halt there. Each evening, I continued constructing my new management system. I dubbed it GILDTCH, officially for GILDO, electronic tracking and equipment calibration. Unofficially, it was my insurance policy. I arranged a meeting with Neil Davison and the remaining management team almost 5 weeks into my contract. The immediate crisis had been resolved. I began, standing before their conference table with my laptop connected to the projector. But you have a structural problem that transcends technical issues. Davison leaned forward. Proceed. Your quality control metrics were concealed from executive purview. Janet Barnes was able to present cost savings without revealing the true impact of her decisions. I displayed a screen depicting production data from the preceding 4 months. Red lines indicated defect rates climbing, warranty claims spiking, precision metrics failing, all while reported costs decreased. This is what transpires when you optimize for one variable at the expense of everything else. The room was silent. I clicked to the next slide, illustrating my GILDTCH interface. This is what I propose: the complete integration of all factory systems with executive-level visibility, real-time quality metrics, predictive maintenance schedules, complete transparency between the factory floor and corporate headquarters. And this would prevent another situation like the one we just experienced. Davison inquired. It would make the trade-offs visible, I replied. You might still elect to prioritize cost over quality, but you do so with complete awareness of the consequences. I clicked through additional screens, demonstrating how GILDTCH monitored each machine, tracked material flow, predicted maintenance needs, and calculated true cost per part, including defect and warranty expenses. How long would implementation take? Davison inquired. 4 months for full integration. I've already built the core architecture. And who would maintain it thereafter? This was it, the moment I had been building towards. I would, under a long-term consulting agreement, 3 days per week, on-site. My company would retain ownership of the GILDTCH software, licensing it to Trellis Logistics with full support and updates. Your company? Davison raised an eyebrow. Lancaster Industrial Systems, my new consulting firm. I hadn't actually formed the company yet, but Davison didn't need to be aware of that. That sounds expensive, one of the other executives commented. Less expensive than what just occurred, I replied evenly. I've calculated the cost of the quality crisis over the preceding 4 months. Lost contracts, warranty claims, overtime, emergency fixes. I displayed another slide depicting the total, just over $4.5 million. The room fell silent once more. My annual consulting fee would be $400,000. The GILDTCH license would be $200,000 per year. Total cost, $600,000 annually. Compare that to your recent losses. Davison scrutinized me. You've devoted considerable thought to this, Mr. Lancaster. I've had time to contemplate, I replied. About value, about knowledge, about what transpires when companies treat individuals as interchangeable components. He nodded gradually. I'll need to present this to the board, but I believe you've made a persuasive argument. As the meeting concluded, Craig was waiting outside. He fell into step beside me as I returned to my temporary office. "How did it go?" he inquired. "We'll see. Either they value what I'm offering, or they don't." Craig smirked. "After the beating they just endured, they'll value it." I paused at my door. "By the way, I'll require a shop floor manager for Lancaster Industrial Systems. Someone who knows these machines, these individuals." "Interested?" Craig blinked in astonishment, then smiled slowly. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely serious. I'm finished constructing success for others. It's time to build something of my own." 1 week later, Neil Davison called to accept my proposal. Not only for the Kalamazoo facility, but for all 7 of Trellis's manufacturing plants. Almost 7 months later, I stood in the observation room above the factory floor, observing operations running more smoothly than they ever had. Beside me stood Neil Davison and another executive I didn't recognize. "William, this is Eleanor Vance, our new Chief Operations Officer," Davison said. We shook hands. "Impressive operation," Eleanor remarked, gesturing towards the factory. "Neil informs me that your Giltech system has revolutionized our visibility into manufacturing quality." "It merely renders visible what was always present," I replied. "Well, it's captured the attention of our entire executive team, especially after what transpired in Milwaukee." I raised an eyebrow. Davison appeared uneasy. "We implemented a similar modernization at our Milwaukee facility," Eleanor explained, "with similarly disastrous results, but thanks to your system, we caught it before it escalated into a full-blown crisis. I'm pleased to hear that. There's something else you should be aware of," Eleanor continued. "Janet Barnes has been let go." I maintained a neutral expression. "I see. Not merely relocated," Davison added. "Terminated. After we discovered she'd received consulting fees from Statera Technologies while employed by us. A clear conflict of interest." So that was it. Janet hadn't merely been cutting costs to impress executives. She'd been receiving kickbacks from Statera. "We've also instituted a new corporate policy," Eleanor said. "All cost-cutting initiatives must include quality impact assessments, and all technical systems must have proper knowledge transfer protocols." "Sounds sensible," I replied. Eleanor smiled. "We're referring to it as the Lancaster Protocol, actually. Your Giltech system has proven the value of institutional knowledge." I glanced down at the factory floor, at Craig training new technicians, at operators working confidently with equipment they comprehended, at the quality metrics displayed on large screens throughout the facility, all running on my system, all generating revenue for Lancaster Industrial Systems. "Thank you for that," I said quietly. "It signifies more than you realize." On a crisp autumn morning, precisely 1 year after my termination, I stood in my new office in downtown Kalamazoo. Through the window, I could see the Kalamazoo River, trees along its banks transforming into shades of red and gold. The space now housed 13 employees, engineers, technicians, and support staff for Lancaster Industrial Systems. My phone buzzed with a message from Craig. "Bay 6 upgrade complete. All systems green." I smiled. Craig had become my right-hand man, overseeing implementation at all Trellis facilities, while I concentrated on expanding to new clients. We'd added 4 more manufacturing companies in the past quarter alone. The industry had begun to discuss the company that specialized in preserving legacy knowledge, about the system that bridged the gap between aging equipment and modern analytics, about the founder who had transformed determination into a triumph. On my desk sat an industry magazine with our story featured on the cover, "The Knowledge Divide: How Lancaster Industrial Systems is Saving Manufacturing Millions." Below it rested an invitation to speak at next year's automation conference. On the panel Janet Barnes had once headlined. I picked up a framed photograph. My son in his graduation cap and gown from last spring. He'd just commenced a position in industrial engineering, inspired partly by witnessing his father's career implode and then rise from the ashes. "Dad, you didn't merely take lemons and make lemonade. He told me at his graduation dinner, "You took lemons and built a lemonade empire." My office door opened, and my assistant poked her head in. "Your 10 o'clock has arrived." The Gilden family. I nodded. Harold Gilden, long retired, had reached out about buying back his old company from Trellis. He wanted my advice on modernizing while preserving quality. I straightened my tie and walked to the conference room. No longer an employee, but a trusted advisor. No longer disposable, but essential. Sometimes the most effective revenge isn't merely proving them wrong. It's evolving into something they never imagined you could become.